Welcome back, fellow cardboarders. Instead of buying a deck for 40 bucks, why not build a deck for 5? This is another installment of Think Outside the Deck box, and this deck was inspired by my brother-in-law who wished to have his own EDH deck, and he chose Skullbriar for this. So Lawbro, if you're watching this is your deck. Skullbriar, the Walking Grave, for a black and a green. You get a 1/1 hasty zombie elemental, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, it gets a +1/+1 counter on it, and all the counters remain on Skullbriar actually as it moves through zones. So if it doesn't go to the hand or library, the counters stay on it. So that's kind of like its kryptonite. Putting it back to its owner's hand or shuffling it into the library, it will lose its counters. But other than that, we are safe and keep a big and scary Skullbriar throughout the game, and we have enough protection to protect him. What I thought would be useful is to include these cards, because there will be counters that we put on him that are not just +1/+1 counters. And I like these punch-outs, but I would say you don't use them as punch-outs. This is how I would do it, but rather put like dice onto the amount of counters that you have. Maybe you have 7 +1/+1 counters, or you have maybe, I don't know, like 2 lifelink counters now. And you can put like different counters, different dice on the counters, and you know how many are on Skullbriar, and you have this maybe lying in your command zone, so that Skullbriar is free to be moved around the table without dice falling off, and you have to recount what's what and getting distracted with what's on him. So this is my first idea of how to manage this deck. As usual, I built some piles. So we have the card draw, the removal, the ramp pile, as well as a counters pile, a getting through pile, a recursion pile, as well as a protection pile, and lastly our land pile, where there are actually quite some interesting lands included, so stick around till the end. This deck actually only costs 5 bucks. The most expensive card is like 25 cents on Cardmarket. So if you want to buy the whole deck, you would actually pay less than 5 bucks. With the shopping wizards, I came out to like 4.71. Shipping not included and basic lands not included, but this is amazing. You can build a whole deck for just 5 bucks with collections of either you have them flying around or people you know, and you just go through their bulk. Maybe you have an LGS that sells like cards for like 5 cents per piece in a bulk box. You can build this whole deck. So if you just want to try out Magic the Gathering, I think this is a beautiful way to get people into Magic the Gathering, have them try out their deck, and they can actually level up their deck with booster packs, with trading, with buying singles. And yeah, this deck is powerful, but obviously there's a lot to upgrade as well, which is also a nice thing. So let's get into the cards. We have our first card draw card, an elf that has vigilance and for 6, and it costs less to activate for each +1/+1 counter on creatures that I control. So most of the time just 1 green, and I draw a card when I tap it for 1 green. Solid card drawer throughout the turns should always be included, and also solid popper card. This one I really like because it's also our first counter card here, which adds shield counters whenever I attack, and most of the time we're gonna put it on Skullbriar, obviously, but sometimes maybe you wanna protect one of our other attacking creatures. Maybe Skullbriar already has a shield counter, or you name it. So until end of turn, whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, I can remove a shield counter from it, and if I do, I draw a card. So we put a shield counter on it, are sure that it doesn't get destroyed or blocked to death, and if it survives, we can remove the shield counter and actually also draw a card. We can also keep the shield counter and later proliferate it to have even more shield counters throughout the game and protect our commander with these as well, and not draw a card for a turn. So I really like this card, and this is also really cheap. So if you haven't tried this one out, do let me know how you like it if you did try it out. Inspiring Call is a also protection card, but also draws us cards. So for each creature that has a +1/+1 counter on it, we draw a card. And it also gives indestructible to these creatures. So it's instant speed, we draw a couple of cards, and we protect our commander. Very useful. I put it into the card draw pile because it's mostly here for drawing cards, but sometimes we just want to play it for protecting our commander. If they, for example, would try to destroy it and we want to keep it around. Hunter's Insight draws a ton of cards with a big Skullbriar. For each damage that we deal to a player or planeswalker, we draw the same amount of cards, so that is amazing in my opinion. We have Harmonize for 4, classic card, draw 3 cards. Not much to say here. Sign in Blood, also classic card for 2. We lose 2 life and draw 2 cards. Could also kill a player that's at 2 life with that, but most of the time we're just going to use it as a card draw. And I really like the idea that we are also able to give our commander lifelink, spoiler alert, and we don't actually mind losing that much life. So keep that in mind when you see cards that lose us life. We don't mind that much. We could also include some stronger cards if you wanted. You could put in, like, if you're going to want to go out of budget, you could put in Necropotence obviously and draw a whole ton of cards with the lifelink counter on our commander. We're always above 40 life, I'd say. Read the Bones, scry 2, draw 2 cards, lose 2 life. This card gives us 3 cards and loses us 3 life. The second effect is not active yet. There is no infect in here, but we could easily add something if we wanted to. By the way, this is a better version of Ambition's Cost, isn't it? That's interesting. I didn't know this one existed until I saw it. Implement of Ferocity gives us a +1/+1 counter if we sacrifice it, and it draws us a card when it goes to the graveyard. Solid card replaces itself, gives our commander another +1/+1 counter. And lastly, the Sphere that just thins out our deck and gives us 2 cards for 1 solid inclusion in any budget deck, in my opinion. Next up, Removal Pile. I like the Removal Pile to have as many options as possible. So I put in a whole bunch of modular cards that have like different modes and you can choose what you want to do. So in this case, we can either give our commander +1/+1, not a counter, and give it Death Touch at instant speed, very useful. Or for 4, we can destroy an artifact, creature, or enchantment. Slice and Twain, classic commander card, either destroys an artifact or enchantment and draws a card, replaces itself. Relic Crush for 5 destroys 2 targets, also a classic and maybe forgotten C11 Commander 11 card. In the original Commander deck it was in. By the way, this is a original Commander 11 back in the day when they invented the first Commander decks. Putrefy for 3, we can destroy an artifact or creature which can be regenerated. Sometimes important that we have this. Blood Curdle is a card that also gives a menace counter onto our creature, but most importantly can also get rid of a creature at instant speed. Ancient Animus lets us give our commander a +1/+1 counter or any other creature if it's legendary, and then fights any creature of our opponents. Most of the time our Skullbriar will survive this, so that's the idea of the fighting cards, and we have enough instants to also protect our commander if something gets out of hand. This one gives Vigilance and Trample and also fights a creature. Then we have this friendly fungus here for 2. You can have a 3/2 which can later sacrifice itself for 1 to destroy an artifact, enchantment, or proliferate, which is I think most important, but also can be used as a removal card. Natural End, artifact or enchantment, gain 3 life, can't say much about it. Naturalize as well, classic card, should be included in any green deck in my opinion. And next up, Ramp Pile. This one I really like and I enjoyed playing over the years. For 3 you get a 0/0 with 2 counters on it, and for 2 you can remove a counter to get a basic land tap into play. We have proliferate cards, so we can use this over and over again throughout the turns. If we don't want Skullbriar to get much bigger, maybe he's at like 21 counters or so, and we can easily one-hit a player out of the game. Maybe we want to put some more counters onto Fertilid. Versatile, there's also Recursion, maybe we want to get him back, maybe our commander isn't targeted as much yet. So very fun and on flavor card to include in this deck. Signet here for just cheap ramp cards. I didn't include like Llanowar Elves or Finthorn Elves, Rampant Growth, you name it. I just wanted to be as budget as possible. Burnished Heart, it's a budget card and does what it should do, gets you 2 basics tapped. Darksteel Ingot just sticks around even if someone plays a Vandal Blast. Solid rock, mana rock. Commander Sphere can be sacrificed to draw a card later if we have enough mana lying around. That's one I liked because you can also cycle it if you don't need mana and just want to replace it by drawing another card. And then we have Search for Tomorrow, which we normally play at turn 1 just to get ahead early. And then we have some more counter interaction, which also ramps. So this one we normally enchant onto our commander, and whenever it attacks, it gets another +1/+1 counter. And if the creature already had 3 or more counters on it, you can sacrifice it and get 2 more basic lands from this enchantment. This also adds a +1/+1 counter, gains you 2 life, you can play an additional land, and draws you a card. Does a lot, and yeah, I mean it costs 3, but in the worst case we get a bigger Skullbriar and draw a card, and 2 life if we don't have another land, which I think is still respectable. New Horizons also adds a +1/+1 counter, and the land now taps for 2 mana of any color. Now counters. Counters is what the deck is all about. Skullbriar keeps them all throughout the turns. We have Unexpected Fangs here for a +1/+1 counter and a lifelink counter onto our commander, which it will keep forever. If it isn't removed by putting it into our hand or library, and we can protect it as I said at the beginning, this commander will be big, like a 10/10 or bigger, and have lifelink and give us life throughout the turns. We're not that scared of losing much life if our commander is tapped. So this is at instant speed also. Keep in mind, these instant speed cards can surprise our opponent. They're like, yeah, give me 10 damage, it's okay, and you also gain 10 life and you deal 11 damage now. The mentor normally puts a lifelink counter onto our commander here as well, and can grow it or others that have lifelink throughout the turns by tapping it. Void Beckoner can cycle itself to give a Death Touch counter onto our commander. If it already has Death Touch counters on it, we can just play it for an 8/8 Death Touch, which can also be quite scary. This instant I enjoy because it gives a +1/+1 counter and a Death Touch counter and untaps it, which can be quite surprising, and our commander can just instant kill any of our opponent's attackers, and they didn't see it coming because they thought our commander is tapped. Speaking of our commander is tapped, Sudden Spinnerets gives us reach. Now we can also deal with some flying threats. If our opponent plays a lot of flyers, we will need this, and this will give us a reach counter. Hunger of the Howlpack adds 1 +1/+1 counter at instant speed, but also gives 3 +1/+1 counters instead if a creature died, and this is what we're aiming at, but sometimes we just need 1 counter, so we're playing it for 1. This we can either play as a land tapped, or if we don't need ramp, we can play it as a counter at instant speed. Solid MDFC, which is quite cheap, relatively cheap. The Pollen Druid here gives +1/+1 counter or proliferates, which we're usually preferring. Now some more powerful cards, which is this Snaky here.
Who's this coming into my home?
Which whenever we add a +1/+1 counter, for example, onto our commander, we add an additional of these counters to our commander. So if we add 1 +1/+1 counter every time, instead we add 2 +1/+1 counters. If we would add a lifelink counter, we add a second one. I don't know why we need a second one, but we get double the counters. If we would get counters, which is a little dangerous, for example, with poison counters, we get an additional 1, so keep that in mind when you play this. If you're playing against Infect, which I don't think many people are playing, you should play this or be very careful with it. Now we have some cards that double our counters on our commander. This one adds 1 and doubles the amount of +1/+1 counters. Soul Smite similarly, we get X +1/+1 counters equal to the power of our commander for just 5. And then this can be a finisher also. These are similar, the doublers, because this also adds 1 and doubles, and it can be played again flashback for X less equal to the amount of mana of our commander. So for 8 we can play it again, which is quite expensive, but maybe we have a turn where we don't have anything else to do and we want to play this and double the amount of Skullbriar's counters again, and maybe kill someone or kill the last player. Hagra Constrictor I really like because it gives menace, and it enters with 2 +1/+1 counters itself. We are playing a whole bunch of tramplers here, and this friendly dinosaur gives a trample counter when it is cycled onto our commander. This friendly guard can add counters to itself, and each creature with a +1/+1 counter has trample. There are multiple of this kind of effect here because trample is quite important to be a threat to our opponents instead of them just chump blocking with a 1/1 creature. Hornbush Mentor gives us trample counter to Skullbriar, and can put a +1/+1 counter on each creature with trample so it can grow. Other creatures, this friendly bug here adds a +1/+1 counter onto any creature and gives trample to all of these +1/+1 creatures. Our friendly kitty does the same, and I just found it very funny to include it. Brawn gives trample as long as we have a forest and it is lying in the graveyard, so we're trying to maybe discard it, which will be a little harder, but just get it chump blocked in a way, or chump block with it to have it go to our graveyard and have trample forever. And this again has trample, and all creatures with counters have trample as well. Last trample card, I think we're playing like 7 or 8 trample cards. This one adds a trample counter and gives +3/+3 at instant speed, which I also found quite strong and included therefore. Then we have double strike as an equipment. It only costs 2 to equip, and to be able to like hit for lethal when our commander is at 11 to hit for 22 lethal commander damage can be quite a threat. With trample, this gets out of hand very quickly, and the ability to have like first strike as well can be also important throughout the game. Lastly, a equipment you might find weird to include, but we actually are playing green and black Voltron, and we're packing all this stuff onto one creature, our commander here, and we don't have any flyers in this deck. So being able to give it reach with one of the cards here, or to be able to give it flying, can be quite important. So these cards here are insurance that we can deal with flying creatures as well. Keep that in mind when you're building this deck. And of course, if you want to include more flying cards or cards that give reach, you can do that as well. Supernatural Stamina, we're at the Recursion cards now, allows our commander to get +2/+0, and when it dies, it enters right back onto the battlefield for just 1 mana at instant speed. And there are many of these effects in this deck. So we have Undying Malice here, which does the same and gives a +1/+1 counter when it re-enters. Feign Death, same card here, just a different name.
Corporate needs you to find the differences between this picture and this picture. Intel has told us there are at least 7.
Okay, I already see one. Give him. Okay.
They're the same picture.
Return to Action. This one doesn't give counters, but also gives lifelink. We can also use it if we need some life points back at instant speed, but most of the time to recur our commander. This one actually revives our commander when it's in the graveyard with a lifelink counter forever. And I don't know if many people know this, but this one can actually take control of an opponent's creature. If we want it, we can play it on our commander. Useful. But if we play this on an opponent's creature when it dies, we bring it back with a +1/+1 counter or under control. So if they have a big scary creature that we want to get rid of, we put it on them and maybe destroy it or get rid of it in any other way. And yeah, we can keep the creature. And Diabolical Servitude, I don't even think many people know this card yet. I even didn't know what this card did because it had so much text, but bear with me. The idea is this: you have a 4 mana enchantment that reanimates a creature from your graveyard. That's settled, so we reanimate our Skullbriar out of our graveyard. And then the following happens. If our creature dies, we exile it and bring this card back to our hand. We have it back in our hand. Our commander is exiled and we put it back into our command zone. Obviously, it doesn't lose counters because graveyard and exile don't affect the counters on Skullbriar. And then we can just normally cast this from our command zone, have it back on the battlefield. It dies, we leave it in the graveyard, and we can reanimate it back again with this card. And we have a cycle of kind of like saving the additional commander tax costs by just reanimating it. We can also use it on any other useful creature that we like to reanimate, maybe some cycled creatures that we cycled that are big. Maybe we want to get those back, maybe the Void Beckoner, for example. We could do that, but this one would get exiled if it dies, but this one gets exiled and put into our command zone again. This is very special for commanders, I think, and maybe you want to consider adding this to your black commander decks, because if you have a commander that is scary and dies over and over again, maybe you want to try this card out. It has one last 9. If this enchantment actually goes to the graveyard, we exile the creature. So they are kind of like bound together. This is kind of the downside of this enchantment. Try it out, let me know what you think. Maybe you have tried it out and thought it wasn't useful, but maybe I want to give it a try. Now, we are at our last pile, which is the protection pile, and I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope this channel reached the 1,000 subscriber mark. We're very close to it. 170, I think, are left as of the filming of this video. Now we have Oblivion's Hunger, which for 2 mana gives our commander or any other creature that we want to save indestructible. And we draw a card if it had a +1/+1 counter, so it even replaces itself. Underused and unknown in my opinion. Professor of Warning, a little versatile. We can either add a +1/+1 counter or give a creature indestructible at instant speed. Gaia's Gift, which is one of the more expensive cards for 25 cents. I think this is one of the most expensive cards in this deck. We add a +1/+1 counter onto one of our creatures. It gains trample, reach, also reach, hexproof and indestructible. So this protects from pretty much everything. So don't just throw this out and give it a +1/+1 counter and say whatever, but use it as a protection as well. And Snakeskin Veil, we add a +1/+1 counter and the creature gains hexproof, which is a beautiful protection card for cards that want to give our commander back to our hand or into the library. Now lastly, here are some interesting lands to add to a Skullbriar deck, which are budget. Oran Reef the Vastwood should be the most expensive for like 29 cents in this deck. It enters tapped, gives you a green, but also adds a +1/+1 counter on a creature that just entered. And this I really like to include because it just supports our commander from the beginning and should be in any Skullbriar deck in my opinion. Burn More and Tranquil Thicket to be just able to either use them as lands tapped or cycle them later on if you don't need them. We have the Guildgate here, which is a solid dual land. Jungle Hollow just gives you a life point as well. We have the Witherbloom Campus, which enters tapped, is a dual land, and for 4, and it's tapping, you can scry 1. If you really have nothing to do, you can do that. I just liked to include this utility land. We have the Temple of Melody to scry 1 when it enters and as a dual land. Classic Command Tower. Path of Ancestry I included because we are probably gonna cast our commander multiple times and we're able to scry with it as well. And then there's Opal Palace, which gives our commander a additional +1/+1 counter for each times it has been cast. So this can also be quite strong. Keep that in mind when you use this on your commander or thinking about putting it into your commander deck, because I think it is quite powerful. We're playing 10 swamps. I included one of each artwork here, which I found, and 15 forests. And now I bid you to let me know in the comments what budget cards you would have liked to include into this deck. If you are thinking about buying this deck on Cardmarket and don't have an account yet, do put in CardboardTutor as your referral. This costs you nothing and supports the channel by your buys and sells on Cardmarket. You can wish a happy birthday to my brother-in-law, and don't worry, I will put sleeves on the deck. And lastly, help this channel out reaching the 1,000 subscriber mark by clicking those 2 buttons. Bring a friend to Magic, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye!